A lot is going on. And thankfully, we do have someone who is on the ground, really face to face with the heartbreaking times that we have been seeing all over the news in Los Angeles. We're actually now joined by Barbadillo, who is part of our Know Your Rights camp. All right. This is family. She also hosts the Know Your Rights Camp podcast, community organizer, and lawyer from the National Lawyers Guild LA. Okay. So Dee knows what she's talking about. And that's what I love about this conversation. Okay. She's been on the front line, actually, right now in LA, while the protests have been going on, when we're hearing about these stories of ICE being violent when it comes to really ravaging communities to stoke fear into so many people's homes, lives. I mean, to be honest, Dee, you are in LA. You see what's going on. Tell us what is happening right now. What are these raids about? What is ICE doing to the community? And paint the picture of what is happening in LA. Meaning, is it a war zone? And I'm saying that quotations in case somebody's listening right now. Or what is really the actual truth of what people in communities are facing right now?
I'm so glad you phrased that question like that. Just to answer your question, LA is not a war zone in the sense that our huge city is on fire. Like, that's this big picture that people want to sort of create for LA right now. And I don't know what narrative that fits, but that's just not the case. Is there violence? Yes. But everyone is talking and looking at photos and videos from protests. But at the same time, no one has photos or videos of the way ICE is invading our communities and kidnapping our neighbors, you know? Like, we have people whose family members are coworkers with, they're actually coworkers. They work at warehouses. They're at Home Depot. They're at the nail salons. They're at school graduations, elementary school graduations. Like, it's great that there's this national spotlight on protests, but they're protesting something in particular, and that's the way ICE is coming in and just kidnapping people. They're taking them from work, they're taking them from school, they're taking them from elementary school graduations. There are students who can't attend their own graduations because they're afraid that ICE might pick up them or their families, you know? And so there's not enough focus, I think, on the fact that that's what's happening. People are losing their neighbors, their family members, their friends. And so when you see these protests, people don't take to the streets for fun. It's 85 degrees in LA right now. No one wants to march 3 miles. We're not in New York. LA Angelinos don't know how to walk. We don't do this. But we're out there because it's, there's this fear that, they say first they came for dot, dot, dot. And it's usually first they come from the immigrants. And that's what's happening. But the Angelinos by and far either immigrants themselves or they came from immigrant families. And so when you see those photos of protesters and people coming out in droves, it's because this is affecting everyone. Everyone knows an immigrant or an immigrant family.
Can you explain what sparked the protests?
Sure.
Can you peel it back a little bit?
Sure.
Why is ICE invading? I don't know if that's the right word, but it feels very aggressive. What prompted this entire situation?
Word spread that ICE was raiding different places in LA at the same time. They were going after workers at Home Depot. They were going after factory workers in warehouses in the fashion district. They were going after people in the flower district in downtown LA. So what we were seeing is that ICE was going into these places at the same time simultaneously. And Angelinos just sort of reacted like, those are our neighbors, those are people, what is happening? And I think what's important for people to realize is that sometimes the conversation goes in the wrong direction. This isn't about how you got here, legal, illegal status. People are fighting ICE because the entity that is ICE, they're completely ignoring due process. People are worried that they're getting arrested and then immediately deported, that they're getting arrested and people who can't read or speak English are signing things in English agreeing to self-deport. So people are realizing that ICE doesn't grant the constitutional rights to people who are arrested, and that's why people are reacting.
Let's stay right there because you're the lawyer here. You have way more knowledge and wisdom than all of us, right? So for many people, they don't understand people are owed due process regardless of their status. Am I understanding this correct?
Correct. So in the Constitution, which was written very meticulously and with so much emphasis on using very specific words, they
Hmm.
use the word citizen to describe rights that are for people who are US citizens. But they'll use people to describe just people who are in the United States. And it's very important to realize that when it comes to due process, habeas corpus, which is the right to, if you're detained or arrested by the government, you are given the right of due process, which is you should be put in front of a judge. There should be a trial. There should be a hearing.
Mm.
And so what happens to you is determined not by the people who arrest you, but by the legal system. And it's very important to realize that, I'm not just reading this as somebody who has a law degree. I'm saying for people who study the law, that it was very specific that they did not use the word citizens when granting this right. They are very clear about making sure this is people in the United States. So status doesn't even matter. And so when people are up in arms, it's about the fact that ICE notoriously deports people without a hearing, without going in front of a judge, without that due process that they're owed. And so that's
Oh.
why people are up in arms.
And ICE, that's a federal entity, right?
Yes, that's a federal entity. And so we're seeing the interplay in cities between state rights, federal enforcement, state enforcement, local city enforcement, and it's just becoming this mess, to be perfectly honest.
So, wow, this is interesting. Okay, so I just really want to focus on that point. So,
Yeah.
everyone technically has the right to have
Mm-hmm.
due process.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's so due process, like I said, the Constitution was written very specifically and with
Mm.
intention. The word citizen shows up multiple times.
Mhm.
So if they wanted to say that a right was for a citizen, the writers of the Constitution use the word citizen, but they don't use that word when it comes to habeas corpus. When it comes to due process, they say anyone in the United States. And that's why, not to go too deep in the weeds, a lot of immigration law is based on that. It was supposed to be, well, a path to citizenship. There's a reason why it
Mm.
used to take so long. And while it's not the best process and definitely takes too long, the premise used to be you start with a hearing, you start with a judge, you start with airing out your grievances, giving your case. um, but what we're seeing with ICE and why it's become such a conversation is that what we've seen is ICE knowing that the person that they've come to arrest doesn't speak English, can't read English. They're giving pieces
Mm.
of paper that say I agree to self-deport, and then not knowing what to do, people who can't read and speak English sign it. That's not okay. What we're also seeing is that they're not coming with an actual warrant for arrest. They're sort of casting their
Wow.
net, arresting a bunch of people, seeing what happens later, and then people who are maybe even US citizens face deportation. And so that's sort of the big thing right now is, well, what do you do when the federal government will enforce your constitutional rights?
So, can we peel that back a bit? Why
Sure.
I started doing this because President Trump is in office. I mean, I'm trying to now get the line
Sure,
of
sure, sure,
why
sure,
they
sure,
just
sure.
started.
It feels
Sure.
very targeted and it almost feels like,
Right.
you know, a blitz all of a sudden. But again, we are
What
ignorant to the situation. So, from your side and your experience and the information you know, why did this begin?
ICE has been around for a long time and deportations have been happening for a long time. But what's different with Trump's presidency is that he made this sort of one of his major talking points when he was campaigning.
Mhm.
And the immigration policy is sort of becoming one of his biggest campaigns within office. When I say campaigns, it's not necessarily like what is he campaigning for? He's already in office. What I mean is it's sort of what galvanizes his base, right? Is
Mm.
immigration. It feels like something that if you speak about it using very specific terms, legal versus illegal, sort of painting the picture of illegal necessarily meaning criminal, necessarily meaning, unsavory, that this is something that really galvanizes his base because it seems quote unquote cut and dry. When in reality, immigration is by far one of the most complicated issues in this country and always has been. So ICE has always been around. ICE has always been doing deportations, but under the Trump administration, he's using ICE and the topic of immigration very strategically. It's very well known, at least in like among Californians and Angelinos, that Governor Newsom, the governor of California, and Trump just don't get along. They don't get along because they're on opposite parties. They don't get along because they don't have the same sort of political beliefs. And, there's been sort of these are, professional slash personal fights between them. And so he's decided that immigration is going to be how he fights his political enemies, how he incites fear, how he shows power, how he asserts power. And unfortunately, he does this thinking that it's a little game, but these are people's lives.
I saw this online, Dee, and I want you to help me understand it a little bit more. So I saw that the reason this administration is targeting Los Angeles, a sanctuary city, right, in a sanctuary state, I'm correct right there, right?
Yes.
Is because Governor Newsom didn't vote on a bill that Trump wanted to push. And again, totally correct me. And because of the tension that they have, right? Clearly they're not on the same side. They have different policies. As in this administration with Trump, they are now targeting Los Angeles by using ICE and immigration. Am I understanding really the political puzzle to the situation?
Yes, in a nutshell, that's the political puzzle, is that California and specifically Governor Newsom has always said, it's sort of been, for lack of a better phrase, like, okay, you say what you want to say, but we're all the way on the West Coast. We know our economy is strong. We know we provide so much for the country. We're just going to do our own thing and sort of just ignore you. And that didn't, sit well with Trump and his presidency. And so it's a little bit of a show of force. But like I said, he thinks he's playing a game, but these are people's lives. And so that's why you see, and I'm sure we'll get into it, that the response to these protests about immigration has also been a battleground between Newsom and Trump.
And Governor Newsom has sued Trump, I think, for the clean air bill, right? So the clean air policies. And now I'm reading something about military being deployed, the National Guard. He's also suing for that as well. How does that work to have the state sue the presidency?
So that's exactly what I was talking about. So all of these raids happened on Friday, and people first started getting word maybe around 8 in the morning last Friday. And by 5 p.m., 5:30 p.m., which is essentially the end of most people's work days, the raids were going on. And so people realized that all the people that were getting detained by ICE were going to the Metropolitan Detention Center in downtown LA. So protests started happening outside of that building. And what happened is the protests grew bigger and bigger. Friday and Saturday, huge amounts of people, thousands of people. By Sunday, President Trump called in the California National Guard. Here's the thing with that. The National Guard is under the purview of the governor. He went over Gavin Newsom's head to deploy these troops to put down protest. And what he did is he invoked some clause that was, in case of a threat of rebellion or what looks like rebellion against the government. That's the clause that President Trump invoked, but he did it going over Governor Newsom's head. And so what he did is he federalized 2,000 California National Guard members to come to Los Angeles. And so I live not far from the epicenter of all of this, and to see them there lined up last Sunday morning was jarring. Because for context, the last time, or one of the, I think the last time a president, federalized state National Guard over a governor's head was during the civil rights movement. And it was done, ironically, to protect Black protesters from police. And so what we're seeing is the complete opposite, which is to go against protesters who are protesting the government. And so, for context, yes, a president can override a
Wow.
governor, but to understand the context of how it's done before versus now makes you see that this is not appropriate use of power.
Damn. Damn. Damn.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Today's June 12th as we're having this conversation, so
Mm-hmm.
things can change within seconds,
Mm-hmm.
minutes, hours, days. Is President Trump deploying the Marines? Has that had any kind of truth to it yet at this point? I mean, not that it has truth, but has he done it? Because I remember him doing a press conference and I think he mentioned like he's
Yeah.
open to the idea possibly, right? If I remember correctly.
Yes. I believe
So
on Monday he deployed the Marines. Yeah. Yeah. He, he did, in fact, deploy, I think, 700 Marines to Los Angeles.
And what is is that to
wow.
in response to the protest? Like, what is
It
he
is.
doing when he's having the National Guard there and he's having the Marines? This is in response to the protests.
It's in response to the protests. It's response to how when people find about ICE raids, they're trying to block ICE. And so it's just generally a response to how Los Angeles is responding. The Marines were deployed to Los Angeles, 700 Marines on Monday. They arrived on Tuesday, which was 2 days ago as we're recording this. I I've been out there every day. I didn't see any Marines in uniform, but I did see Marine vehicles. They're not quite tanks, but they're definitely the armored vehicles for Marines driving through the city. Um, it's a little unclear what's going on in terms of where National Guard and Marines
Right.
go, but I looked it up, and from what I understand, based on precedent and other things, the National Guard and the Marines generally protect federal property. So that would be the detention center, the federal courthouse where people are protesting. And so what that is like, why is there still so much going on? Like, what are these clashes that some people are seeing in the news? That's actually between local law enforcement, LAPD, LA Sheriff's Department, CHP, the
Mm.
California Highway Patrol, and protesters. And the reason that's such a big
So are
deal
they
is
working with ICE? Sorry,
that's
D, really
no,
quick.
no, 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 no. That's a good question.
It is, yeah, like it's a bit muddy for us to understand. So is the LAPD and ICE working together? Like who's all working with each other? Like tell
Right.
me, kind of paint the picture of like who versus who kind of thing. So we
Sure.
know who's on whose, I
Yeah.
guess, team.
So what we're seeing here is ICE is the presence that we know of and that people are actively protesting. So we see ICE on the ground here. Backing them up is the Department of Homeland Security. And we also saw FBI at these raids. So those are the federal entities. But what is causing a lot of alarm for us locally is that we, as in Angelinos, always knew that Los Angeles is supposed to be a sanctuary city. Sanctuary cities are not supposed to comply with federal law enforcement. And so, in that situation, we should not be seeing LAPD or the LA Sheriff's Department or even the California Highway Patrol on the streets right now. But what's happening is we're seeing LAPD, we're seeing LA Sheriff's Department, we're seeing CHP deployed within our city. And that's why people are also another reason people are upset because the feds might do what they're going to do because they're federal government. But what's upsetting us is that our local government is not stopping our local law
Mm.
enforcement from aiding and abetting, and I'm going to use the term aiding and abetting these federal agencies. LAPD says, well, we're not working with ICE. But if you go to any photo or video of protests in LA, I guarantee you'll see LAPD and LA Sheriff's Department. And so that's really another sticking point. What's the point of being a sanctuary city if our elected officials, for whatever reason, are deploying our local enforcement to back up the federal agencies that are conducting these raids? So on one side is LAPD, LA Sheriff's Department, Department of Homeland Security, ICE, and National Guard. On the other hand, citizens, non-citizens, Angelinos.
How are Angelinos right now? And the reason what I'm trying to understand, we're hearing so much again about, things aren't well in Los Angeles, the whole phrasing of positioning it as very dangerous. Really, what is going on and who is actually being violent? This is a moment of truth for all of us because we are not in LA. What is the landscape? You are actually on the ground. You're not giving us your opinion, from the hills. No offense. We're not throwing shade at, analysts, but you are truly a lawyer. You are out there truly defending people's rights. So who is causing the violence and what is going on?
I'm going to say this and people think I'm just trying to make a bold statement, but the truth of the matter is the violence is and always has been because of law enforcement. Actually, I can't help but laugh because I live, like I said, in the epicenter of all of this. There's actually a protest marching by my apartment right now. I can hear them, but here's the fact. I have been there every day since Friday when these protests started. This is how violence starts. You
I
have
hear them in the
protesters.
background.
You hear them in the
Hmm.
background. They're rolling
I
by with
do.
their sound system right now.
Right.
Power to them. What you see is protesters outside saying their piece. They might be yelling. They might be holding up signs, chanting, dancing, sharing food. We've even had people share food with each other. And then what happens is police decide that they want to clear the area, that they want this protest to end, or they need to make a lane for vehicles to come through, whatever the case may be. And instead of everybody step back, everyone needs to leave the area, I've not been hearing that. What I've been seeing are law enforcement using tear gas, pepper balls, pepper spray, less lethal rubber batons, foam batons. So they lead with violence. And that's exactly how things happen here. And I can actually say that I've seen with my two own eyes. That's what happens. And then they push folks away from these areas and they push them into neighborhoods and they trap them there. And so, sure, you might see some tagging. Sure, you might see signs. Sure, you might see some trash, but there's no one is rioting. No one is rioting. I feel safe to go to protest. There are children at protests. And here's sort of the beautiful thing about it. You still see immigrant food vendors at protests. And so we're not rioting. And also, I want to sort of break this sort of idea. Some people are saying to sort of combat the LA is on fire narrative. They're like, no, it's just that area of downtown LA. Yes, that's true. Most of these protests are happening in downtown LA by the detention center, by the federal building, by City Hall. But the people at these protests do come from all over LA. So all of LA is not burning, but all of LA is representing.
Ooh. Ooh.
Oh, you can hear it in the
Wow.
background.
I
Yeah.
do. I do. I hear it. Now, is there a curfew currently?
There is a curfew, and it's only for downtown LA. So
Mm-hmm.
for those familiar with LA, it's downtown LA from the 110 to the 5, from the 101 to the 10. It's like 1 square mile. The idea is to deter these protests, but to be perfectly honest, people don't care. And it's not to say they don't
Mm-hmm.
care just because they want to break a law. People just feel like this is too much of an issue to care about a curfew law. Yeah, a
So
curfew rule.
we're talking about the rights that immigrants have as they're getting detained. What are the rights that protesters have? Like, what's something that somebody that's protesting or going to a protest should know as it relates to their rights or, what's going on?
Sure. First of all, everyone has a right to protest. That's the First Amendment. It goes along with the right of free speech. And even though they may not be protesters at a lot of protests now, you're going to see the media, and there's the right for the media to be at these protests as well and to take photos, take videos. At a protest, you have a right to free speech. You have a right to carry whatever sign you want to carry. You have a right. Sorry, they're protesting on my street right now. But as a protester, you have a right to speak your piece. You have a right to assemble. You have a right to chant, to dance, to sing, to do whatever you need to do to get your point across. And that's sort of an issue too, is that police just want to get rid of the crowds. And there's ways that they can go about this correctly, but they're just not doing that. What I've seen by and large is that they're leading with force. And I happen to hear commands on police radios because they have them turned up when I'm at these protests. Chief of LAPD has given carte blanche okay for them to use less lethal force. Less lethal refers to rubber bullets like this one. They're allowed to shoot
Whoa.
these at protesters. They're
Ooh.
using pepper balls, pepper grenades. They're using stinger grenades. They're using force. And I think the idea is to make people afraid to come out to protest. Though I don't think it's working, to be honest.
Oh, clearly, absolutely. What rights do immigrants have?
Sure.
For context of this
Yeah.
question, what are the rights that people actually have when ICE are doing raids and trying to detain people?
Right. Ideally, and so whenever I talk about people's rights, I always have to sort of pause and say there are your rights and then there's your reality. And unfortunately they're not as unfortunately those are two categories that aren't necessarily the same. So when it comes to your rights as an immigrant in terms of what happens if you encounter ICE, number 1, you have the right to remain silent. Give the information in terms of your name. If you have an A number, give them that name, give them that number, but you have a right to remain silent. 2, you have a right to ask to speak to an attorney. Now they won't provide you one, but you have a right to say, I'm not answering any questions until I speak to an attorney. Ideally, you should be going in front of a judge and you have due process and a right to due process. Whether that happens is sort of, we're seeing it's not necessarily happening for everybody, but that is your right. And so those are some of the most basic rights. And that when you are being arrested, you should be able to say, like, can I see a warrant with my name on it signed by a judge? We're seeing that ICE isn't necessarily providing those, but those are your rights. They're pretty basic. They're actually quite similar to the rights of somebody who's a citizen. And this was done on purpose, right? It's in line with the Constitution. But you do have rights as an immigrant. And I hope that most people know that, like, contact an immigration attorney, have a plan in case ICE comes, have a plan, have numbers to call, whether that be an attorney or a rapid response hotline.
And, because we're all part of the Know Your Rights camp and
Mhm.
we have our free app, please download it. It shares state by state laws when it comes to protesting rights, your rights as an immigrant. What do you do if ICE shows up? It talks about just traffic laws. Really, there are a lot of rights that you have. And for a lot of us, we don't know that we have these legal rights. So please go look at it. Our app is free to download. Know Your Rights Camp. It is free. Now more than ever, we all need to know what our rights are. Right. And, there's nothing wrong with a little reminder, a little refresher. Pass this information to other people. Pass it around. It's really important, especially during these times. How can people support what's happening even if they're not in LA, from LA or anything? They have no ties to it whatsoever.
I think the most basic way to support what's going on in LA is to read more than the headlines. Read the news and then look for local media, right? I know every city, every state has media that are more local, that are not necessarily tied to a big syndicate, because those tend to be the people who write a little bit more detail. Find people who are in different cities and understand what's going on. Have the conversations, have the tough conversations with people in your family, people in your circle, people who are your friends. Have the tough conversation. And that's the biggest way to support. And honestly, keep your eyes on LA. And we may have been one of the first cities to sort of erupt in protest, but we're not going to be the last. And so pay attention to each city, know what's going on, and like cite the patterns of behavior and just stay informed, because, the reason why the Know Your Rights Camp app, the reason why the resources help, is the more informed people are, the more they're ready to combat narratives that aren't true, the more folks are
Mhm.
ready to have those conversations. And that's the most important thing, because knowledge, we've seen from this administration that suppression of knowledge seems to be one of the number one campaigns. So keeping informed helps to fight against that.
D, for people who are saying, I'm not an immigrant, I have no ties to immigrant this or
Sure.
that, why should I care? I don't care. I have enough things going on, not in LA, or hey, I am in LA, I don't care. Why should
There's
people care with what is going on and what we're seeing happen with ICE detaining people?
the most, and not to be flippant, but I think it's absolutely impossible for somebody in this country to not know somebody who's an immigrant or in a family that comes from immigrants. Everybody knows an immigrant. You just may not know it, or may not have taken the time to figure out who is and who isn't an immigrant. But, beyond that, the reason you should care is that there's the easy reasons. One, immigrants in this country do the work that a lot of people in this who are citizens, not to make that distinction, won't do. Two, this country is made up of immigrants. And we're not just talking brown, black, non like people of color. People, it was, white folks, European folks who were also immigrants to this country. To say you don't care, you can't live in a bubble like that. It's 2025. If you lived in a bubble up to this point, I don't mean to be harsh, but you need to step outside yourself. And
Mm.
so you have to care too, because immigrants, native folks, black folks, this administration has come for everybody already, and they're going to make their way to you. Whatever you are, whatever your identity is, they will come for you eventually. And so we are all integrated in some way. So, you've heard the saying, first they came from the immigrants. Well, this is your chance to stop them.
Whew. All right, Katrina, any last thoughts before we wrap up with D?
No, man, just, D, we're sending you our energy, our love. I know you're out there
I know
making
you
sure.
got arrested.
Yes.
Doing it work. Why did you get arrested?
Wait, what happened?
Yeah, you know what? I will tell you the full story of how we got arrested, because I'm pretty sure my story is not too far fetched from other folks that have gone arrested at a protest. I got arrested because law enforcement is jumpy and quick to pull the trigger. There was a protest happening. Folks were chanting, giving speeches, and because a lot of cops in LA don't actually live in LA, they don't know how to deal with the fact that there are, in fact, unhoused people in Los Angeles. There were two unhoused people that wouldn't move fast enough. And like children, LAPD don't necessarily use their words. Instead of saying, hey, please move, they shot them with these. The loud popping noise got the attention of the crowd, who started turning to see what was happening. And when law enforcement saw that there was a big crowd, they sort of reacted by shooting off more or less lethal weapons, and then using cops on horses to charge towards the crowd to move them back. They got rid of most of the crowd. They told people to leave a certain way, and despite people leaving a certain way, they decided to arrest us. They arrested us, but truth be told, it didn't make sense. They told us to go that way. Police arrested about 100 of us for failure to disperse. It seems that these are sort of fear mongering tactics that are used to sort of deter people from protesting. But I don't really think it's working, because in the 4 hours we were detained in handcuffs and sitting at the police station getting booked, I watched people exchange Instagram handles from memory. I watched people make plans to go to protest together. I even saw a meet cute happen. Um, so, you know, we talk about the doom and gloom, we talk about this, but there's a lot of community and camaraderie out there. And so I think while it's easy to use protest and force and all these things to scare folks, at the end of the day, community is community, and people are fighting each other. And, whether it be Angelinos with each other or Angelinos with New Yorkers, or, people are finding community and a shared sort of understanding that this doesn't seem right to see our neighbors being kidnapped. And that sort of is galvanizing folks to speak up. And it's there's a lot out there that's not great to watch, but there's also these sort of beautiful side stories happening too. Yeah.
Man, you're doing the real work. Please stay safe out there. Keep us updated with what's going on. Dee is just incredible. And we're so thankful you host our Know Your Rights Camp podcast. If you haven't seen those episodes, please look back, especially if you loved everything she had to say today. She has a wealth of knowledge that she continuously shares with the people. Make sure you check her out. Where else can people find you, Dee?
I'm on Instagram. If you go to the Know Your Rights Camp podcast, you'll see me tag there. But yeah, I share what's happening because I know that not everyone can be out there. I am part of the group of people that are out there for the folks that can't.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dee. We appreciate you, and please be safe.
Always, always.